Welcome to the Reaching Up Podcast. I'm Ron Farris.
And I'm Daniel Locke.
And today our topic is pornography. Pornography, a tough topic.
Very much so.
I'll start us off with one of my favorite quotes I've ever heard in my life. You know, I'm a lawyer, and back in 1964, our United States Supreme Court took up the issue of pornography. And Justice Potter Stewart was asked point blank, you know, how do you describe pornography? And he thought for a second, and he said, I know it when I see it. You know, it's pornography is best defined as a medium. It can be a picture, a video, a text. It can be a sound. It can be an audio tract. It can be anything that's intended to be treated as sexually arousing. So that is pornographic. You know, we won't go back with a lot of history, but I will say that, you know, pornography has been around since human beings have been around. There are discoveries of cave drawings that are pornographic that go back to the earliest civilizations that we know of mankind. Human enchantment with sexual imagery has been constant throughout every culture, throughout history. It's always been with us. Now, the interesting thing is, in our times, we have seen the advent of the internet.
Yeah.
And the big change with the internet brought instant access to pornography, along with anything else, right into the palm of your hand.
Yeah.
In every home, and it's in the privacy of your home. So it's not hard to believe that pornography has exploded in the last 20 years. Interestingly, some of the most I started to say celebrated, some of the most notorious forms of pornography have been around for a long time. The Kama Sutra, which was a Sanskrit text that dealt strictly on sexual practices, was the 3rd century CE. That's, a couple of 300 years after the birth of Christ. So that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And one of the first English versions of pornography was in 1748, which was the book Fanny Hill, which came out in Great Britain, which was just largely decried as one of the most horrific pieces of pornography ever written. But listen to this. The first photographic version of pornography is attributed, of all people, to Thomas Edison, who depicted a kiss in a film that he made in the early 19th century, and it was largely decried as obscene in this country. Now, how far have we come?
Yeah.
Because today, pornographic product, and that's anything from a legal perspective, that's anything that doesn't exploit other people. In other words, any voluntary sexual acts above the age of majority can be recorded in any version, and those are considered essentially to be protected by the First Amendment, the free speech protections in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. So I know pornography is actually legally protected speech, but it is regulated if it deals with illegal subjects like children, and as it should be. And there's a lot of argument that pornography probably should be, more heavily regulated because it is so easily available to children on the internet and things like that. And that's a debate that we're not going to solve today. But that's what pornography is. And of course, like I said, the availability today and the proliferation, I'd say worldwide, of smartphones and the internet has taken it to a whole new level.
Yeah.
Now, as a thing, pornography, as it turns out, has been heavily studied.
Yeah.
But we talked about addiction in our last episode. There is a very wide, broad range of opinions on whether you can or can't get addicted to pornography out there in the scientific community. Now, I may have an opinion on that, and probably do. Probably we'll talk about it here in just a minute. But researchers have identified 4 broad motivating factors for people who look at porn. One is an innate sexual drive or desire. They just have this innate craving to look at it, which makes sense when you think about it. Another one is to learn about sex and improve their own sexual performance. So there's an academic interest in looking at porn. Another is peer pressure or social groups. You know, everybody in their little friend group is looking at it, so they're assuming everybody's doing it. So that's something that they think they should do, just like drinking beer or smoking joints or you know, whatever, sneaking out at night.
Yeah.
And then finally, lack of sexual relationships or absence of a partner. There's some people who are doing it out of loneliness. It's basically a surrogate form of sexual satisfaction for them because they don't have a real person to have an intimate sexual relationship with. So they do it vicariously.
Yeah. So
those are sort of 4 general societal factors that bring porn into the picture. But some interesting statistics, and then we'll talk about it.
I was about to say, let's go over statistics, because I have a couple that I'm like, that's surprising.
Well, tell me what you got.
Well, I've got, as far as viewership, like the research I found said a significant number, and they didn't know the exact one because some of it's self-reported, I guess, and so it could be, I assume it's higher. Said that about 70%, it could be as high as 70% in certain age groups who have reviewed it. In the past month, some studies indicate that like 40 to 44% of American men, and we're using American men at this, have viewed it, but I assume it's going to be very similar elsewhere. It is higher in younger adults, but it is prevalent across the board.
Well, some other statistics in addition to those, same number, 70%. 70% of online porn access in this country, the United States, happens between 9 to 5 on business days. So what that says is that the vast majority of porn use is occurring while people are at work.
Yeah.
Which means if you're an employer listening to this podcast, you ought to pay attention to that. That means 70% of the people that looking at porn are doing it on your dime, and that means it's cutting into productivity. And we will talk about that here in just a minute in terms of whether it's addictive or not. Studies have found that greater levels of psychological distress leads to higher rates of pornography consumption. It's used by a lot of people as a way to cope with anxiety. So imagine that. Many religions, of course, have consistently condemned it, but some religions embrace it as a part of a very what I'd call a libertarian approach to sexuality. Sexuality is one expression of human existence, and so in some faiths it should be exploited, and pornography is considered to be ritualistic and acceptable in some religions. And I imagine those religions probably could be pretty popular among people who want to look at porn and don't want their religion to tell them that it's a bad thing or harmful. That makes perfect sense. But here's the flip side of porn. Porn has been, as studies are proving, porn has been proven to result in feelings of sadness, loneliness, anger, unworthiness, and rejection, along with perceived judgment of their self by others, a lower self-esteem and a higher level of self-conviction. Sexual shame in people actually has been proven to lead to more shame. The shame that they feel, they try to cope with it by looking at the porn or whatever the addictive process is. So it becomes a habituated experience, and it's cyclical. The shame leads to the anxiety that leads to the use of porn in this instance, and it's usually porn plus. It can be porn plus compulsive masturbation. It can be drug and substance abuse, which lowers the inhibitions and leads to more willingness to use the porn again, and then that leads to shame, and then you're into this vicious cycle that just perpetuates itself, which is why people like Patrick Carnes say that porn is very much addictive, and porn addiction is very much a real thing.
I think based on our conversations from last episode, I think it'd be crazy not to include that. Not to include this in there.
I absolutely believe that I have met and I've worked with a lot of people in addiction, and I have absolutely known several people, now quite a few, I would say, over the last 15 years, who are addicted to many things, but certainly porn addiction is one of those things that I have seen. And not just porn addiction, but porn use can, and this has been clinically proven, can lead to very risky and abnormal sexual behaviors outside of marriage that tend to raise the risk of sexually transmitted diseases and all manner of other problems that, including, relationship problems or destruction and loss of marriages, this kind of thing. The inability to work. I have met people who are addicted to porn, and this is true with people addicted to gaming apps and to social media like TikTok and other things. I've seen this. They lose their ability to stay engaged with their employment, their work, and they give up whole days to just watching porn and masturbating. I mean, it's hard to talk about, but I have genuinely met people who are at the point of losing their jobs or their marriages because they cannot stop. So nobody's got to convince me that it should be on that list of things that are addictions. And oddly enough, the scientific community is very, very hesitant to add pornography addiction to the list. In fact, none of the major lists of clinically acknowledged addictive processes includes porn addiction. Which is interesting. I wonder why that is. I don't know, but another statistic for you. Ironically, regions with highly religious and conservative people are found to be the highest number of people who search for porn online. That was a shocker to me. We're not here to to judge anybody, and we're not experts really on anything, but that's a statistic that I didn't expect to hear.
And I also saw that when I was moving, and I wondered if even just the idea of addiction in general in the church is something that's not well understood, I think it's not as acceptable.
I certainly don't hear it discussed as much.
No.
Now, in my church, I will say I go to a non-denominational church. My pastor is very adept with issues that deal with addiction, and he mentions pornography pretty consistently as one of the signs that you may need to stop and really check, do your spiritual check engine light, pornography. Let's talk about just the practical effects of it. So pornography takes another human being and treats them as an object. In the addiction world, we call that objectification. It is never healthy for me to look at another human being as just an object to be used. That is never going to be good, never. And so porn, that's what porn is all about. Porn takes an actor or an actress, and it portrays them doing things. First of all, let's agree that it is a total and complete illusion. If some, and I'm not recommending research on this one, but if somebody were to watch, let's say, a 15-minute pornographic experience, that probably took maybe a few hours to film, because there's stopping and starting, and there's checking this and that. There's a whole battery of sexual tests for sexually transmitted diseases. There are hidden uses of different techniques for birth control and for STD control, and you're not seeing any of that behind the camera because the idea of the film is to just make it look like it's natural and it's fun and it's just, it's just anybody can do it, when in reality it's taking a crew of people, a lot of work and concentrated effort to try to make that look that way, but it's all an illusion.
No.
I don't know how people don't just see that. It's a no-brainer to me. Anything that you see on film is gonna, is not as simple as just turning the camera on and doing your thing. But the reason that it is so powerful is because all human beings have this innate need for connection. And the sad thing about pornography is that someone who has to look at someone else, actors doing these things, that's probably a sign that the connections in their life are deficient or non-existent, and that's truly sad.
And I think that goes into what you talked about earlier of like it's shameful or it's lonely, and so we use this behavior to try to medicate that, for lack of a better word. We use it to. We feel, and I think that the reason it's so widespread is because we can all have this. We can all have a feeling of loneliness, of sadness, and you can. And we've talked about it in our episodes of loneliness. Of you can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely, and you can be apparently at work and lonely or sad or anxious. And so it's, if you think of it as an addiction, just like we talked about last one, of something that. A learned practice to deal with something anytime you've ever felt lonely, and now add in that, I don't know what the percentage, but it's got to be high of 10, 11, 12-year-olds who have iPhones now. Make it less than that. Every single one of them is connected to the internet. And then just starting out is like, that's your exposure. And then you go through high school or college and those ages, like it's just everywhere. And so if you think about this being, and I've heard somebody say it before, it's like, what would it be like for a cocaine addict if there was cocaine on the ground here, and then it was on the billboard up there, and then it was on every commercial just about.
If you could find it within 30 seconds, anytime you wanted it. It would. Yeah, I get that. That's a perfect picture of how easy it is to get, and that is a fact. I know a lot of people who are in recovery from porn addiction that can tell you that there's virtually no way to structure a smartphone so that you can't work around the protections that are available and find what you want. So there really has to be a change in your core belief system. And this is what, talking about the solution a little bit, Patrick Carnes was one of the first people, probably close to 40 years ago, to diagnose the possibility that porn addiction and sexual behavior could be an addictive pattern. And Carnes attributes the source of the addictions to the addict's belief system, which he says which is based on false beliefs or beliefs that are not accurate. And his recovery program centers around the correction of that belief system, basically. But it is a 3 to 5 year process because those core beliefs are so deeply rooted, and it takes a lot of work to rewire your brain's belief system about that to a healthy condition, so that you can enjoy a normal experience with things sexual, or intimate, not just sexual. And you get your priorities straight, in essence, and then you don't need porn, and you realize that porn is actually harmful to a normal intimacy system, and a healthy intimacy system. And Carnes is all about changing those core beliefs. And he says this, he says, generally addicts do not perceive themselves as worthwhile persons. Which is interesting. Nor do they believe that other people would care for them or meet their needs if everything was known about them, including the addiction. Finally, they believe that sex is their most important need. Sex is what makes isolation bearable. If you do not trust people, one thing that is true about sex and alcohol, food, gambling, and risk is that it always does what it promises for the moment. Thus, as in our definition of addiction, the relationship is with sex, not the people.
Yeah.
So Carnes is, in my opinion, one of the foremost voices in our culture today about sex as an addiction. And even though he hasn't been completely embraced by the scientific community, I personally think he's 100% right.
Yeah.
And it is something that, from my observations with the many people I've come in contact with, porn addiction is a very widespread problem. And I have seen it extensively in young men that I come in contact with. A lot of times I'm talking to them about some other form of addiction, and it becomes obvious at some point that they are dealing with multiple addictions. And interesting, a lot of times alcohol use, drug use will lower the inhibitions so that porn use becomes habitual and ultimately becomes an addiction.
Yeah.
And it is a really hard thing to break out of porn addiction when you are also struggling with drug addiction or alcohol addiction. And so the recovery process can be extremely difficult.
Yeah.
I'll say one other thing about that. So porn tends to release dopamine in the brain, which is the reward system that drives virtually all addiction, about the same level that cocaine or extreme opioid addiction does. And that makes it literally as addictive as heroin. And it is exceedingly hard to break that kind of psychological dependence. And so it is almost impossible to do without help.
Yeah.
And so I would say to people out there, if you feel like you are looking at porn and you, well, let's don't say that. If you are looking at porn, you know if you're doing it or not. Then you may want to stop doing it for a while and just see what happens.
Yeah. Or see if you can, because I think it goes back to our conversation last time.
That's what I'm talking about. I think, a lot of times you identify addiction by realizing, I'm going to stop this, and then you realize that you can't.
Yeah. Or the implicit messages in porn is that I need this, I deserve this. I'm meeting a need that's not getting met. I'm not in a relationship, so I can do this thing. I am in a relationship. That's worse. So I think we forget, or we don't know. I think it's that we don't know how hurtful it actually is, just personally to us. Just like you're talking about viewing people as objects, but also how hurtful it is to use this as a counterfeit for real intimacy. Because I don't think, and I think it's a lie that when you get in a relationship, you won't do that. Like that's a lie. When you get married, it'll go away. That's not true. Like it has to be addressed. I think you're right.
That's a big one. That's a big one. I as I say, I work with a lot of men who are struggling with addiction. And in the area of porn addiction, I've seen two things that are prevalent. And this is in young men. The first time I actually saw this was with like a 28-year-old Marine. He was fit as a fiddle, but he was experiencing extreme episodes of impotency in his relationship with his absolutely beautiful wife. And Carnes and others have identified as one of the primary symptoms of compulsive chronic porn use is that you lose the ability to be to properly respond to just a normal heterosexual relationship, and that means that if you're looking at a lot of porn, then you may be unable to be satisfied by just your normal wife because she's not a porn star, and she's not, a normal intimate relationship is probably not going to be as sensational as one that's been created, for purposes of selling porn. That's just not normal behavior, and it destroys it raises expectations to an elevated level, and your body begins to expect that excitement. And if your wife or your spouse, because women are addicted to porn as well, can't deliver that, then you lose interest in the relationship, and ultimately you may abandon that relationship for the fake relationship of porn and masturbation. That is a story that is told thousands of times every day. And it's much more prevalent, I think, than people are willing to acknowledge. Certainly more so than the medical community has acknowledged so far, the scientific community.
I think I think I like the quote that, again, I go back to Gabor Mate because we talked about him in the addictions, and the quote that I think is very helpful is it's not about the substance or the behavior, it's about the need. Addiction is a need trying to be met in an unhealthy way. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I don't know, when I read that, I see hope because there is a healthy way. Like, there is a healthy way. And I hate that pornography devalues this thing, or it puts a lot of shame around the idea of sex when it's like, it's a gift from God. Mm-hmm. And I know people, and even saying that sometimes it's like, oh, I'm not experiencing the gift, or I'm hurting the gift. Like, there shouldn't be shame around it. It should just be a realization that there is a healthy way for this. And sometimes it's not as easy, just like, well, let me just stop. Like, sometimes it's going to take some research, like we've done. Like, it's going to take some trying. Sometimes it can be a really good friend who understands, who can help you. Sometimes you may need a counselor who can help you dig a little deeper. Like, it just depends on it. But inaction is still an action. If you choose not to address it, it will still rear its head at some point and hurt. And it's going to hurt you, and it's going to hurt those around you. And so I think it's important that we talk about it, because I think we both know that it can hurt people. We've seen it done.
Oh, there's no question in my mind about it. In fact, I will tell you right quick, personally, based on all the people, in my case, mostly men, that I have encountered that are dealing or trying to deal with porn use and addiction, I'm convinced that it's probably unlikely that they can escape it without clinical help. That's just the way I look at it. It is so highly addictive because of the way it becomes habituated in the brain that it's going to take a long process. Carnes' program suggests that there are roughly 30 steps to delivery from porn addiction, and it takes a minimum of 36 months and more likely 60 months. A lot of people who go into a program that's designed by Carnes make a 60-month commitment, because that is a staged process, and it is a phased process. In Carnes' program, he suggests that you go through what he calls early recovery tasks, which deal with just, talking it out with a therapist, quantifying the nature of the problem, coming to understand that it is in fact an addiction, that it is in fact a dangerous pathological condition that you must take action to get out of your life. And then he almost always brings in support groups. Then you go to this lengthy process of changing your belief system, which is where he thinks the problem really lies, in just misunderstandings like, well, it's okay because everybody does it. That's a lie.
Yeah.
It's not okay, and not everybody does it, and most everybody that does it is harmed by it. But but you don't think about that when you're wanting to do something. You're just thinking about, there's nothing wrong here. Yeah. When in fact there is. You go through that long process, and then the last phase of Carnes' program is to address the issues within the family, because porn addiction, like any other addiction, typically leaves a trail of destruction and damage, particularly in a marriage. And it is, I would say, it is about the greatest misstatement I will ever make to say that it is hard to rebuild a marriage after a sexual betrayal. And porn use is viewed in most cases by the spouse who has been hurt as a betrayal. And it is a long, hard road. And I have witnessed this several times, and I never see it get any easier. And it takes an enormous amount of effort. I think it takes clinical help in the case of porn addiction, and compulsive masturbation, and even with that, the support groups are essential, and then you just have to a lot of prayer. you have to struggle through it. So if anybody's listening, I will, rounding us out, as we finish this up. Addiction is just one of, pornography is just one of the things we can become addicted to. And addiction is just one of the ways that we rebel against God. There is an element of personal discipline involved in human life. We can do whatever we please. God instilled us with self-will, with free will. But there is always that element of wanting to follow God's leadership. And there are multiple references in the Bible to the importance of controlling what we set in front of our eyes. So when you talk about porn, I'm reminded of Job, who suffered a great deal. But in Job 31:1, he was acknowledging, how he had tried so hard to be a faithful man. And one of the things that he said was, I've made a covenant with my eyes. Interestingly, one of the apps that you can buy to put on a smartphone to control your ability to access porn is called Covenant Eyes. Not that we're plugging anybody's products, but that's where that comes from, I imagine. In Psalm, David, who struggled with temptation, he actually did commit adultery and then murdered the woman's husband that he had adultery with, but he sort of snapped himself out of it at a point. And in Psalm 101, verse 3, he said, I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. Because at the end of the day, we do have control over what we put in front of our eyes. In Psalm 119, he wrote, turn my eyes. He was praying to God for help. Turn my eyes from looking at worthless things. And then in Proverbs, Solomon, the smartest man, they say, who ever lived, said that there are 6 things that the Lord God hates. And one of those things is haughty eyes. Eyes that are quick to, indulge in things that they shouldn't see. And I'll say this last thing about pornography, and this is true with not just porn, but it's certainly true with porn. Porn is something that once you open your eyes to it and it gets into your system, you're never gonna be the same. You can't unsee something that you've seen. I've heard one person say that it opens doors in your soul that should never be opened. And, we can only hope that God will provide a deliverance for us from it, because it will destroy your life very quickly. As a friend of mine likes to say, addiction of any kind will take everything good in your life, and then it wants to destroy your life. And I do believe that's true. Not to leave out the New Testament, Jesus spoke to the temptation to use our eyes to look at things we shouldn't, and he was so bold in, as is reported in Mark's Gospel, chapter 9, verse 47. If your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It's better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into hell. So not to get into the theological aspects of that conversation in this episode, maybe later, but what that tells me is that, we need to take great care with the things that we expose our eyes to. And pornography is one of those things that should be on the, on the never, ever list. So that's pornography. Anything else about pornography? Because we're out of time.
Well, let's have a trigger warning and say we're not advocating people tear their eyes out. That's not at all what we mean by that. But it's something that Jesus was so adamant about. He saw it was very important. So
he was using hyperbole.
He was. I want to make sure those of us who not familiar don't know that aren't like crap. Because when I was growing up, I thought that was true.
Do not tear your eyeballs out. There are better, easier ways to deal with this issue.
Yeah, I think it's important. I like what you said there. Like there is always a choice, and I know it can sometimes be very. It can make the guilt pile up when you're like, well, I can't regulate myself out of this. Like, you will not be able to white knuckle your way out of any addiction, and pornography being one of them. And what I mean by that is you won't be able to just try hard enough, pray enough, not try hard enough in order to make yourself proud of yourself. You won't be able to discipline away an addiction. Like you need to have, we go back to it, like you need to, connection is the cure for addiction.
It's part of the cure.
It's part of the cure. Yeah. It's a very complex issue, but you need to find where there's a support for that. Like I don't know, if you're going to somebody and they're like, I will pray for you in your addiction. They don't go to somebody else. Find somebody who's going to join you in the fight and can relate to you and say, yeah, I'm fighting too.
Well, the honest truth is, and with any addiction, it is to, once you can face the reality that you may have a problem, is to find somebody who has had the same problem and is living in a state of sustainable recovery.
Yes.
And then just talk to them about what
they did
worked for them.
Yep.
Yeah, what did for them. And there's great hope in that. And again, I would say the simple test is, if you think you may have a problem with it, just try to quit doing it and see how that goes.
Try to go 90 days, like you said. The 90-day test is a good one, I think.
It's the moment of truth for a lot of people. Well, that is going to wrap it up for pornography. We may talk about some other aspects of this down the line, but that's it for this episode. So thank you for listening to the Reaching Up podcast. We appreciate you. If you're on YouTube, be sure and hit that like button. While you're at it, subscribe, tap that bell button so you'll be the first to get our next episode. If you're listening on Spotify or any of the other services, be sure and follow us so you don't miss an episode. Feel free to comment. We read all the comments, and we really appreciate the feedback. And check us out on Instagram and Facebook. And then if you'd like to send us an email, we'd love to hear from you. We will answer questions, and we'd like to hear from you if you have an opinion on a new topic or something that you think we should talk about. We will respond accordingly. That is contact@reachinguppodcast.com. Thanks for listening.